He hadn't thrown a punch in 6 years. He'd promised himself, and the grave marker at Riverside Cemetery, that those hands were done with violence. But the moment Nathan Cross saw the masked men drag the woman toward the black SUV, he looked down at his son's face, felt the small fingers tighten around his, and understood with cold, terrible clarity that some promises get broken not because you're weak, but because walking away would cost you something worse than your soul. If this story moves you, drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The snow had been falling since 3 in the afternoon, the kind of heavy, wet December snow that muffled the sounds of the city and turned the streets of downtown Harlow into something almost peaceful. Almost. By 7 o'clock, the sidewalks along Meridian Avenue were glazed over, and the traffic had slowed to a cautious crawl, headlights smearing orange through the dark. Nathan Cross noticed none of that. He was focused entirely on keeping his son from slipping. Owen had insisted on wearing the boots with the smooth soles, the ones Nathan had told him twice were wrong for weather like this. And now the kid was proving Nathan right in the most inconvenient way possible, skidding every third step and grabbing his father's hand like a life preserver. "I told you," Nathan said. "You didn't say it was going to snow this much." "I said it was going to snow, period." Owen made a sound that was somewhere between a grumble and a defense attorney's opening argument. He was 7, and he was already better at arguing than most adults Nathan had met, a quality that was simultaneously exhausting and quietly impressive. They were 2 blocks from the Harlow Grand, a hotel whose Christmas lights had been visible from 6 intersections away. Owen's school had partnered with the hotel for some kind of winter fundraiser, a lobby display of student art, hot chocolate, the whole production, and Nathan had promised 3 weeks ago that they'd go. He kept his promises to Owen. That was the one thing he'd decided early on, after Elena died, that he would not let slip. Other things could get sloppy. The shop could have a bad month. He could eat cereal for dinner 4 nights in a row. But the promises to Owen held. They came around the corner onto Meridian, and the hotel materialized out of the snow, a broad stone facade with brass fixtures and a row of black iron lanterns burning along the entrance canopy. Valets in long coats moved in and out of the light. A line of idling vehicles stretched along the curb. Nathan was already scanning the scene. He didn't do it consciously anymore. It was just how his brain processed new environments. Entry points, exit points, the number of people and how they were moving, anything that broke the pattern. 6 years out of the teams, and the habit was still wired in like a second heartbeat. Most of the time it showed him nothing interesting. Tonight it showed him something that put a cold weight in the center of his chest before he'd even fully registered what he was seeing. A black SUV, no plates visible from this angle, was parked halfway up the hotel's side access lane, which wasn't a parking area. It was sitting crooked, nose angled outward toward the street, engine running. Nathan could see the exhaust curling up through the snowfall. A second SUV idled 20 feet further along, same configuration. Between the 2 vehicles and the hotel's side entrance, 3 men stood in the kind of loose formation that looked casual to anyone not trained to read it. They were dressed wrong for the weather, light jackets when everyone else had coats, and they were watching the hotel doors with a focused stillness that had nothing to do with waiting for a cab. Nathan slowed. Owen didn't notice. He was trying to read the banner strung above the hotel's main entrance. "Dad, it says the art show ends at—" "Hold on." The hotel's side door opened. A woman came out first, late 20s or early 30s, dark coat, heels that were clearly not chosen with December ice in mind. She had the particular kind of composure that came from being used to rooms where everyone watched when you walked in, though right now she was frowning at her phone, head down, half distracted. 3 steps behind her came a hotel security guard and what looked like a personal assistant carrying an overnight bag. Nathan recognized her half a second later. Not personally. From the news, from magazine covers, from the kind of coverage that followed certain people whether they wanted it or not. Vivian Ashford. Her company had been all over the financial news for the past 18 months. Something about a cybersecurity contract with the federal government, a valuation that had put her on the cover of 3 different publications in the same quarter. He'd seen her face on a television in the shop waiting room and not thought much of it. He thought about it now. Because the 3 men by the SUVs were moving. They moved with the practiced coordination of people who had rehearsed this. Two of them converged on Vivian from the left side, cutting off her path toward the valet stand. The third stepped directly behind the security guard and did something fast and low that Nathan didn't fully see, but understood immediately by the guard's sudden stillness and the way he went down against the wall like someone had cut his strings. The assistant screamed. One short burst of sound before the nearest man grabbed her arm and spun her aside hard enough that she hit the iron railing and went down. Vivian Ashford did not scream. She turned, tried to turn. And Nathan could see the moment she understood what was happening, the way her whole body locked, and then tried to move in 3 directions at once while the men closed around her. 16, maybe 18 seconds had passed since the door opened. Nathan looked down at his son. Owen had gone completely still beside him, fingers tight around Nathan's hand, staring at the scene 40 yards away with wide eyes that Nathan recognized. The specific look of a child whose brain has identified danger but hasn't yet produced language for it. Owen. Nathan knelt, putting himself at eye level with his son. The snow was coming down harder now, and Owen's cheeks were red from the cold, and Nathan put both hands on the boy's shoulders and held his gaze. I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to do exactly what I say without asking questions, okay? Owen stared at him. Something in Nathan's voice had changed, and the kid could hear it. Okay, Owen said quietly. See those glass doors right there? The main entrance? The ones with the doorman? Yeah. I need you to run to those doors right now, go inside, find an adult, a hotel person, someone in a uniform, and tell them to call 911. Tell them there are men with guns on the side of the building. Can you repeat that back to me? Owen repeated it back, word for word, because Owen had always had a memory that alarmed teachers and delighted Nathan. Good. Nathan looked at his son for one more second, took him in, the red cheeks, the 2 smooth boots, the school backpack with the broken zipper, and then straightened up. Run. Don't look back. Go. Owen ran. Nathan turned. The first thing he did was take stock of what he had. No weapon. He'd stopped carrying anything after he left the service. Another promise, this one to himself. He had his hands, his coat, and about 20 yards of open sidewalk between him and the nearest man. What he had, more than anything else, was the fact that nobody was watching him. All 3 men were focused on Vivian, who was not making it easy for them. She was fighting, not with any kind of training, but with the wild, furious energy of someone who understood that the moment she stopped resisting was the moment things got much worse. She'd gotten one hand free and raked it across the nearest man's face mask, and he'd responded by grabbing her wrist and twisting hard enough that she cried out. Nathan covered the distance in 12 steps. He didn't announce himself. He didn't say stop or freeze or any of the things that existed in action movies. He hit the man on Vivian's left from behind at a dead run, driving his forearm across the base of the man's skull, and they went down together into the slush at the edge of the access lane. The second man spun. Nathan was already moving. He took the elbow strike that came at him, which hurt considerably more than he'd have liked. He was 35, not 25, and the part of him that had once been absolutely certain of his own physical capability had long since developed a more realistic perspective. But he caught the man's arm on the follow-through, locked it, applied pressure to the joint in a way that produced an ugly sound and a louder reaction. "Get to the hotel," Nathan said. He wasn't yelling. He was talking at the flat level register that came out of him in moments like this without any conscious decision, the voice that had once given coordinates over satellite comms while taking fire. "Now, move." Vivian Ashford was staring at him. "Now," he said again. She moved. The third man, the one who'd taken down the security guard, had circled around the front of the nearest SUV, and Nathan heard him before he saw him, heard the specific metallic sound that meant the equation had just changed in a significant way. He threw himself sideways. The shot was louder than he expected. People always underestimated how loud gunfire was in an open space, even with the snow swallowing some of the sound. And it went wide, sparked off the iron railing where he'd been half a second before. Vivian screamed then, just once, short and involuntary. Nathan hit the ground, rolled, came up against the rear panel of the first SUV. His shoulder was wrong. He'd landed badly on the sidewalk, and something had shifted that wasn't supposed to. and he filed that information away for later consideration because later was what mattered. The man with the gun was moving around the front of the vehicle, cutting off the route back to the hotel entrance. Behind Nathan, the access lane ran toward a parking structure, dark at this hour, multiple levels, the kind of place that was bad to be chased into. He had about 3 seconds to make a decision. He made it. He came around the passenger side of the SUV at a low angle, below the man's sightline, and hit him from beneath. Not a clean technique, not elegant, nothing that would have impressed anyone who knew what they were doing, but functional, which was all it needed to be. The gun came loose when the man's wrist hit the door mirror. Nathan kicked it under the vehicle and kept moving. Vivian was pressed against the hotel wall near the side entrance, one shoe gone, the assistant beside her with a cut on her forehead from the railing. The security guard was sitting up against the wall, dazed but conscious. "Can you walk?" Nathan said. "Yes," Vivian said. Her voice was steady. That surprised him a little. "Then walk, fast. Don't run. Running draws attention, and you'll fall on the ice. Go to the main lobby and stay there." One of the SUVs had started moving. Nathan could hear it, the engine revving, tires finding uncertain purchase on the snow. The men were cutting their losses. He disrupted the timing too badly, and they'd had enough. He watched the vehicles pull out of the access lane and disappear into the traffic on Meridian, and he stood in the falling snow breathing harder than he would have liked, left shoulder doing something that would be considerably more apparent in about an hour once the adrenaline finished metabolizing. He became aware that his hands were shaking, not from fear. The fear was already gone, metabolized into some chemical the body produced for exactly these situations. The shaking was the aftermath, while the system coming down from a state it hadn't been in for 6 years, recalibrating, running checks. "You swore you were done with this." He had. He turned toward the hotel entrance. The lobby was chaos and the polite, controlled way of expensive places that prided themselves on never looking chaotic. Hotel staff moved with urgent precision. Someone was already on a phone. A cluster of guests near the Christmas tree stood in the particular configuration of people who weren't sure whether to be alarmed or simply curious. Nathan found Owen standing with a man in a hotel manager's jacket near the concierge desk, both of them watching the door. When Owen spotted Nathan coming through the entrance, he crossed the lobby at a pace that stopped just short of running. Because Owen was 7, not 4, and he had his father's stubborn pride about certain things, and hit Nathan in the midsection with both arms. Nathan went down on one knee and held his son for a long moment. "I called them," Owen said into Nathan's coat. "Well, the manager did. I told him." "I know. You did good." "Are you hurt?" Nathan pulled back and looked at his son's face. The wet eyes that Owen was working hard not to let become actual crying. The jaw set the same way Nathan's jaw set when Nathan was trying to hold something in. He looked so much like Elena in that moment that it produced an ache that had nothing to do with the shoulder. "I'm fine," Nathan said. It wasn't entirely true. The shoulder was going to need attention, and there was a cut on his left palm he hadn't noticed until now that was producing a modest but persistent amount of blood onto the lobby's marble floor. He pressed his hand against his coat. "Your hand," Owen said. "I'm fine. I need you to stay right here with this gentleman." Nathan glanced up at the manager, who nodded. "The police will be here in a few minutes. When they come, I need you to tell them your dad is here and that we're okay. Can you do that?" Owen studied him with the particular focused attention he brought to things he didn't entirely believe. "Why aren't you going to tell them?" "I will. I'm going to step outside for just a minute." "Nathan." It stopped him cold. Owen almost never used his name. Elena had done the same thing, deployed his actual name as a precision instrument when all other tools had failed. "I'll be right back," Nathan said. "I promise." He straightened up, nodded again at the manager, and walked back toward the side entrance. He needed air. He needed 60 seconds where nobody was asking him anything or looking at him with the expression people got when they were trying to decide whether to be grateful or afraid. The access lane was empty now. The snow had already begun to cover the scuff marks and the place where someone's shoe had dragged across the salted concrete. In a few hours, nothing would be visible. Nathan stood in the cold with his bleeding hand pressed against his coat and looked at the dark street where the SUVs had disappeared. And he thought about the 3 men. their coordination, their equipment, the clinical speed of the whole operation. This wasn't random. Someone had planned this carefully. Someone had known where Vivian Ashford would be and when, had staged vehicles and personnel in advance, had been willing to use a firearm on a public street. Whatever she'd gotten herself into was considerably worse than a simple mugging. He heard sirens 2 blocks out, getting closer. He went back inside. Owen was exactly where he'd left him, standing beside the manager with his arms crossed, and his expression suggesting he intended to have further opinions about the evening once the immediate crisis had resolved. Which was, Nathan thought, absolutely fair. "Okay," Nathan said, coming to stand beside his son. "Let's wait for the police." Owen looked up at him, looked at the hand Nathan was still pressing against his coat. Didn't say anything, just uncrossed his arms and put one small hand around Nathan's wrist, not the injured one, the other one, and held on. Nathan let him. The lobby filled with flashing blue and red light from the windows. Outside, the snow kept falling, indifferent and steady, covering everything. The police took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nathan knew this because Owen fell asleep in the lobby chair at the 90-minute mark, sitting upright, arms still crossed, as if he'd intended to simply rest his eyes for a moment and then gotten ambushed by exhaustion. And Nathan sat beside him watching the clock above the concierge desk and thinking about his shoulder. It wasn't dislocated. He'd had dislocated before and knew the specific nauseating quality of that particular pain. This was something softer, a deep muscular strain from the landing combined with whatever the elbow strike had done to the joint on the way in. It would stiffen badly overnight and be worse by morning. He'd ice it when he got home, wrap it, take something for the inflammation. He'd dealt with worse, with less. The detective who eventually came to take his statement was a woman named Rourke. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the particular economy of movement that came from doing the same job for 20 years. She looked at Nathan's hand, which a hotel staff member had wrapped in a clean towel, and then looked at his face with the expression of someone doing a rapid assessment. "You want to tell me what happened out there?" she said. "I saw men grabbing a woman. I intervened." "You intervened." She wrote something in her notebook. 3 men, at least 1 firearm. "You intervened." "Yes." "You have any training for that kind of thing?" Nathan looked at her steadily. "I know how to handle myself." Rourke studied him for a moment. She was good enough at her job to recognize when someone was answering questions truthfully while simultaneously providing the minimum possible information. "We're going to need your contact information. There'll be follow-up questions." He gave her his name, his address, his phone number. She wrote it all down without any particular reaction. If she recognized the shop's address from anything, from local news, from whatever record the county might have on a former military contractor who'd returned to civilian life, she didn't show it. "The woman," Nathan said. "Ms. Ashford, is she all right?" "She's speaking with our investigators now." Rourke glanced toward the far end of the lobby, where Vivian Ashford was seated in a private alcove with 2 plainclothes officers and what appeared to be a corporate attorney who had materialized with impressive speed. "She's asking about you." "She doesn't need to." "Mr. Cross," Rourke put her pen down. 3 armed men tried to kidnap a billion-dollar CEO on a public street tonight. The person who stopped them walked in here with a bleeding hand and a shoulder that's clearly bothering him and seems primarily concerned with whether a stranger is okay. I've been doing this job for 19 years. That's not the usual profile. Nathan didn't say anything. "You're free to go," Rourke said after a moment. "For now." He woke Owen carefully, guiding the boy upright with a hand on his back. Owen surfaced slowly, bleary and confused, looking around the lobby with the particular disorientation of someone who couldn't immediately reconstruct where they'd fallen asleep, or why. "Are we going home?" Owen asked. "Yeah, we're going home." They left through the main entrance. Nathan did not look toward the alcove where Vivian Ashford sat under fluorescent light with her attorneys and her police escorts, though he was aware of it the way you were aware of certain things without looking directly at them. The cold hit them at the door, and Owen made a short, unhappy sound and pulled his coat tighter. The drive back was quiet. Owen asked one question. "Did you hurt them?" To which Nathan said honestly, "Some of them, probably." Owen absorbed this and then said nothing else for the rest of the drive. He was like that. He processed things at his own pace and in his own order, and came out the other side with conclusions that were usually more considered than Nathan expected from a 7-year-old. At home, Nathan wrapped the shoulder, washed and bandaged the hand properly, and stood in the kitchen at 11:15 at night, eating cold leftover rice standing up because sitting down felt like too much effort. The house was quiet in the specific way it was always quiet when Owen was asleep, a different quality of silence than the kind you got when you were alone. An inhabited quiet. Nathan had learned slowly to find some comfort in the distinction. He didn't sleep well. He hadn't expected to. By the following morning, the story was on every local news channel and most of the national ones. The footage came from a security camera mounted on the hotel's exterior. Low resolution, snow obscured, shot at an angle that made everything look slightly unreal. It showed a figure moving across the access lane with a purposeful speed that the anchors kept describing as extraordinary and military-like, though the actual content of what the footage showed was less cinematic than the language suggested. It was chaotic. It was messy. The figure in the footage moved with purpose, but also stumbled once, recovered, went down to the ground at one point in a way that looked genuinely dangerous. They called him the mystery hero because Nathan had given a hotel staffer a false first name, Marcus, which was the name that had come to him first, the name of the best man at his wedding and his closest friend from the teams, and because he'd left before the press arrived. The footage was being replayed on loop beneath chyrons asking, "Who is this man?" and local hero vanishes after saving CEO. Nathan watched about 4 minutes of coverage while Owen ate cereal across the kitchen table, then turned the television off. "That's you," Owen said, without looking up from his bowl. "Don't talk with your mouth full." Owen swallowed. "That's you, though." "Eat your breakfast. You've got school." Owen ate his breakfast. At the door, pulling on his coat, the correct coat for the weather, with the correct boots this time, a small concession that Nathan noted without comment, he stopped and looked back at his father with the particular expression that meant he was about to say something that had been organizing itself in his head since the night before. "The men in the cars," Owen said. "Are they going to come back?" Nathan looked at his son. The honest answer was that he didn't know, that the men in the cars represented a level of coordination and resourcing that didn't typically evaporate after one failed attempt, and that whoever had organized that operation had been after something specific enough to risk a public abduction. The answer he gave his son was different. "No," Nathan said. "They're not coming back." Owen nodded, accepting this, and went out to catch the school bus. Nathan stood in the doorway watching him go and tried to decide whether he'd just lied to his kid. The shop opened at 8. It was called Cross Auto, a name that Nathan had arrived at through a complete absence of creativity and which had served the business adequately for 4 years. The space itself was a double-bay garage on Clement Street that Nathan leased from a retired electrician who'd owned the building since the 80s and had no interest in selling it, which suited Nathan fine. He liked the building's age, its slightly uneven floors, the way the back bay smelled permanently of oil and old rubber, no matter how many times he cleaned it. He had 2 employees, Danny, who was 22 and mechanically gifted and perpetually 30 minutes late, and Sal, who was 61, had been fixing cars since before Nathan was born, and worked Tuesday through Thursday because his knees had developed opinions about full-time employment. Between the 3 of them, they kept up with a reasonably steady flow of neighborhood business. Older vehicles, mostly, the kind of work that dealerships didn't want because the margins weren't good enough. Nathan was under a 2009 pickup with a transmission problem when Danny arrived at 8:30. "You're on the news," Danny said by way of greeting. "Good morning. I'm serious. They've been running it all morning." Danny crouched beside the truck. "That's definitely you in the video. I could tell by how you walk." "Hand me the half-inch." Danny handed him the socket wrench. "Are you going to say anything about it?" "About the socket wrench?" "Nathan." "Daniel!" Danny stood up, making a sound of frustration. He was a good kid, genuinely good, the kind of young man who occasionally displayed a conscience and a sense of justice that were slightly out of fashion with his peer group, which was part of why Nathan had hired him. But he also had a tendency to push on things he found interesting, a quality that Nathan found useful approximately 60% of the time and exhausting the other 40. "I'm just saying," Danny said. "People want to know." People cannot know. Why? Nathan slid out from under the truck and looked at his employee. Because it's not any of their business. And because Owen doesn't need cameras outside the school. Can we talk about the transmission now? Danny opened his mouth, made a decision, and closed it. Yeah, okay. They talked about the transmission. The attention peaked over about 5 days. News cycles moved fast, and the mystery hero story had everything that made good television. Drama, violence, a beautiful billionaire CEO, and a protagonist who'd vanished, but lacked the resolution that kept audiences engaged long term. By the end of the week, the coverage had migrated to background status, referenced briefly in stories about the investigation, and then left alone. Nathan's phone rang twice from numbers he didn't recognize. He didn't answer. 3 television production companies sent inquiries through the Clement Street business address. He didn't respond. Vivian Ashford's people called the shop on day 4. Nathan knew it was her people before the woman on the phone finished her opening sentence. The crisp, practiced efficiency of a corporate assistant who was used to her calls being taken seriously. Ms. Ashford would like to express her personal gratitude to Mr. Cross, the woman said. She's hoping to arrange a brief meeting at a time that's convenient for him. Tell her I appreciate it, but it's not necessary. A pause. The kind of pause that suggested the person on the other end was recalibrating for an unanticipated response. Mr. Cross, Ms. Ashford is prepared to offer significant compensation for your— No, thank you, Nathan said. I hope she's doing well. He hung up. Danny was staring at him from the other side of the bay. Was that her? Danny said. Get back to work. She found him anyway. He should have anticipated it. A woman who had built a cybersecurity company from a 14-person startup to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise in 8 years had presumably developed a functional capacity for locating information she wanted. Cross Auto's business registration was public record. So was the address. She came on a Tuesday afternoon in January, 5 weeks after the incident at the Harlow Grand. She came alone, which Nathan noted. She came in a car that was neither conspicuous nor ridiculous, a 4-year-old dark blue sedan that someone at her company had probably recommended as unobtrusive. And she parked it correctly, not blocking anything, and she came through the shop's front door and stood in the small waiting area with the plastic chairs and the old coffee maker that Nathan kept meaning to replace. He saw her through the bay window. He took his time finishing what he was doing, which was nothing critically urgent, but he wasn't inclined to hurry. When he came through into the waiting area, she was standing with her coat on and her hands in her pockets, looking at the framed photograph on the wall, the only decoration in the room, a photograph of a stretch of coast that Nathan had taken on a camping trip with Owen 2 summers ago. The coast near Redfield Bay, morning light, the water going silver blue toward the horizon. She turned when she heard him. She looked different from the woman in the news coverage, from the woman on the magazine covers that Nathan had seen in passing over the past several months. Those images were curated, controlled lighting, the careful architecture of a public image. The woman standing in his waiting room looked tired in a way that no photographer would have published. There were shadows under her eyes, and she was holding herself with a slight tension in the shoulders that suggested someone who hadn't slept easily since early December. Mr. Cross, she said. Ms. Ashford. They looked at each other for a moment. Your assistant told me you'd said no, Vivian said. I thought I'd come ask in person. The answer's the same. I haven't asked yet. Nathan leaned against the door frame. You're going to offer me money. My answer is no. She didn't look surprised. She looked, if anything, like she'd expected this and had come anyway. Can I at least explain why I wanted to come? He didn't say no to that. He gestured toward the chairs and then pulled one out for himself and sat in it, which she seemed to take as an invitation because she sat down across from him. I've been thinking about what to say since that night, Vivian said. She had a quality of directness that Nathan found, despite himself, easier to deal with than diplomacy would have been. She wasn't performing gratitude. She was working out how to express something she actually felt, which was a different thing. I've rehearsed it probably 100 times. Thank you seems absurdly inadequate. Every variation of it sounds wrong. You don't need to say anything. I know I don't. I want to. She paused. Those men, you understand what would have happened if you hadn't. I have a general idea. They were going to kill me, Vivian said flatly. Eventually, once they had what they needed, my security team found communications afterward. This wasn't a kidnapping for ransom. Nathan absorbed this without visible reaction, though internally he recalibrated several assumptions. Then you should be talking to the FBI, not to me. I'm talking to the FBI. I'm also talking to you. She looked at him steadily. I want to help you. I want to offer you something. Security for your family, financial resources, whatever you need. Name it, please. I don't need security resources. I don't need financial help. Mr. Cross, Nathan. She paused. Nathan, you saved my life. You were injured doing it. You walked away without telling anyone who you were. I've spent 5 weeks trying to understand why a person does that. And the only explanation I can come up with is either that you're pathologically modest or there's something you're protecting. He looked at her. Both, maybe. Your son, she said, among other things. Vivian nodded slowly. She glanced at the photograph on the wall again. That's Redfield Bay? Yeah. I've been there. My parents took me when I was 12. It's beautiful. It is. They sat quietly for a moment. The shop sounds came through the bay wall, metal on metal, the low grind of something mechanical, Danny's radio playing something Nathan couldn't quite identify. Is there anything, Vivian said, anything at all that I can do? Nathan looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her. He hadn't planned to say anything. The words came out anyway, which was the thing about feelings you didn't examine very often. They surfaced in the spaces where your guard came down. My son is 7, Nathan said. He's going to grow up in a world that your company has a significant hand in shaping. The technology you're building, the security infrastructure, the data protection work, it matters. Not just to corporations, to people. Ordinary people who don't know your name and will never know it. He paused. Do that work right. Do it honestly. Make sure the power you have goes towards something that makes the world he inherits safer. Vivian was very still. She was watching him with an expression Nathan couldn't immediately classify. Not the gratitude he'd expected, not the calculation he'd half anticipated. Something more unsettled than either, like he'd said something she would have to think about for a while. That's what you want? She said. It's what I'm asking. She was quiet for a long moment. I can do that. Then we're square. She almost smiled. It was a small, complicated expression that changed her face considerably. We're not square. I don't think we'll ever be fully square, but I'll accept the terms. She stood, pulling her coat around her. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you miss it? Whatever you did before, the military? Nathan thought about that honestly, the way he'd learned to think about it, without flinching away from the real answer, without dressing it up in something more comfortable. Parts of it, he said. I miss being certain, knowing exactly what the threat was and what your job was in relation to it. Civilian life is murkier. It is, Vivian agreed. She said it with a weight that suggested she wasn't speaking abstractly. She left the way she'd come, quietly, without ceremony, pausing briefly at the door to look back at him with an expression he didn't try to interpret. He heard the sedan start up outside and then pull away. Danny appeared in the doorway from the bay approximately 6 seconds later. Was that who I think it was? He said. Get back to work, Danny. It was, wasn't it? It was her. Danny. Okay. He retreated back toward the bay, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think you should have taken the money. For what it's worth, Nathan said, noted. Durasham. He thought about her on the drive to pick up Owen that afternoon. Not in any particular way, not romantically, nothing that simple, but in the way you thought about encounters that left a residue, conversations that turned something over in you without completing the turn. She'd been more than he'd expected, which he recognized was reductive, a function of having formed an impression from news coverage and magazine covers, and not much else. The woman in the waiting room was complicated in ways the coverage didn't capture. He pushed it aside by the time he got to the school. Owen was waiting near the front gate with his backpack and a drawing he'd done in art class. Some kind of vehicle, though Nathan couldn't immediately determine whether it was a spaceship or a submarine. and he launched into a description of it before Nathan had fully stopped the truck. "It's a deep-sea explorer," Owen explained, holding it up for inspection, "for the part of the ocean where it's completely dark. Mrs. Callahan said some fish down there make their own light." "Bioluminescence," Nathan said. Owen looked at him. "How do you know that word?" "I was in the Navy. We learned about the ocean." "Did you see any fish that make their own light?" "Not personally, but guys on the boat talked about them." Owen considered this as they pulled out of the school parking lot. The drawing was propped on his knees, and he kept glancing at it with the specific satisfaction of a person reviewing work they were pleased with. Nathan let him have the quiet. Owen would get to whatever he was working toward in his own time. 2 blocks from home, Owen said, "That lady came to the shop today, didn't she?" Nathan glanced at him. "Danny called you?" "Danny texted Mom's old phone. I found it in the kitchen drawer and I figured out the passcode." A pause. "It's my birthday." "The passcode." Nathan made a mental note about the phone. "Yeah, she came by." "Did you talk to her?" "Some." "Is she nice?" Nathan turned onto their street. The streetlights were coming on in the January dusk, and the houses along their block had their windows lit up from inside, gold rectangles against the blue-gray evening. He looked at his son's drawing propped on the dash, the deep-sea explorer with its bioluminescent fish, and at the 7-year-old who had used the word passcode like he'd known what it meant for years. "Yeah," Nathan said. "She's pretty decent." Owen nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. At home, while Nathan made dinner, Owen did his homework at the kitchen table and explained, without being asked, that bioluminescent fish produced light through a chemical reaction in their cells, which he'd apparently looked up on the school computer during free period, and that some species of jellyfish were immortal, which he found deeply unfair. "Why unfair?" Nathan said. "Because they don't do anything with it. They just float around." Owen tapped his pencil on his homework sheet. "If I was immortal, I'd do a lot more than float." Nathan stirred whatever was on the stove and thought that this was probably the most accurate self-assessment his son had ever offered, and that Elena would have laughed at it for about 30 seconds and then told Owen it was the truest thing she'd ever heard. The ache of that was familiar enough now that it didn't stop him. It sat in the room with them like a quiet third presence, not unwelcome, not consuming, just there, part of the texture of an evening. "Eat your dinner when it's ready," Nathan said. "I know," Owen said. "I always do." He did. He always did. And Nathan put 2 plates on the table and sat across from his son and listened to the continuation of the immortal jellyfish argument, and outside the windows of the small house on the quiet street, the January dark settled in, indifferent and complete. The calls started 3 days later. Not from news organizations. Those had tapered off. These were different. A block number that rang twice and disconnected. A voicemail that was nothing but ambient sound and then silence before it cut off. A text from an unknown number that said only, "We know where the mechanic lives." Nathan stared at that message for a long time. Then he called the detective, Rourke, and left her a message. He photographed the texts and sent the screenshots to an email address he maintained for exactly the kind of contingency he was supposed to be done with. Then he went and stood in the doorway of Owen's room and watched his son sleep, one arm thrown over the edge of the bed, the deep-sea explorer drawing pinned to the wall above the desk, the sound of the winter wind pressing against the window. The shoulder still hurt when he moved wrong. His hand had healed to a pink scar along the palm. He'd been telling himself for 5 weeks that it was over, that he'd done what needed doing and the rest was somebody else's problem. He was starting to suspect that wasn't going to be true. Rourke called back at 6:40 the following morning. Nathan was already awake. He'd been awake since 4, which was not unusual, a habit from years of early wake cycles that his body had never fully released. And he was on his 2nd cup of coffee when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. "The text came from a burner," Rourke said, without preamble. "Purchased with cash at a convenience store in Belmont 3 weeks ago. We traced the purchase location, but there's no useful footage." A pause. "There were 2 others like it, sent to Ashford Security's threat monitoring system. Different numbers, same pattern. So they're watching both of us." "That's the working assumption." Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Cross, I'm going to ask you directly. Your military background. We've done some digging. The public record is fairly thin. It usually is for the kind of work I did. Which was what, exactly? Nathan watched the kitchen window. The January morning was still dark outside, the streetlight catching the frost on the glass. I was a SEAL, 14 years. Most of what I did after year 4 is still classified, and I'm not in a position to discuss it. Rourke absorbed this without audible reaction, which Nathan respected. There are federal people who want to talk to you. Bureau. They've been working the Ashford case since December, and they've developed a picture of the organization behind the kidnapping attempt. They believe you may have relevant experience. Tell them I'm a mechanic. I did. They said they'd like to speak with the mechanic anyway. She gave him a name, Special Agent Calloway, and a number. They're not going to compel you, but I'd encourage you to hear them out. Nathan took down the number and thanked her and poured the rest of his coffee into the sink. He drove Owen to school himself that morning instead of letting him take the bus. Owen noticed the deviation from routine immediately, but didn't comment on it until they were 2 blocks from the school, at which point he said, "Are you worried about something?" with the directness that Nathan had mostly stopped being surprised by. "Just felt like driving you," Nathan said. Owen considered this. Okay. At the drop-off, Owen climbed out and then leaned back through the open door the way he sometimes did, 1 foot on the running board, backpack half on, and looked at his father with an expression that was working hard at nonchalance and not entirely pulling it off. "You'll be at the shop today?" he said. "All day? And you'll pick me up at 3? 3:15, like always." Owen nodded, satisfied with this small architecture of the predictable, and dropped off the running board and walked toward the school entrance. Nathan watched him go all the way through the door before he pulled out. He called Calloway from the shop at 9:30. The agent picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Cross, thank you for reaching out." The voice was measured, the kind of measured that came from professional training rather than natural temperament. "I know your position. I'm not going to waste your time pretending this is a casual conversation." "Good," Nathan said. "The organization behind the Meridian Avenue incident is a criminal syndicate operating primarily in corporate espionage. They go by Helix internally. It's not a name they use publicly. It's what our analysts have labeled them based on recovered communications. They've been active for approximately 11 years, and in that time they've been responsible for at least 6 corporate data thefts that we can definitively attribute to them, 3 of which involved physical violence." Calloway paused. "Ashcorp's new cybersecurity platform contains classified defense infrastructure architecture that Helix has been trying to access for 8 months. They believe Ms. Ashford carries the primary encryption keys personally. The kidnapping was an extraction attempt." "What changed in December?" "A global technology summit in Harlow, February 14th. Helix has acquired credentials for the event. We believe they intend to make a second attempt during the summit. Not an abduction this time. Based on intercepts, they're planning to use the summit as cover for a direct operation against Ashcorp's primary secure server array, which is temporarily relocating to the summit venue for a live demonstration. They intend to kill Ms. Ashford and extract the data simultaneously." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "February 14th is 3 weeks away." "Yes." "You want me to do what exactly?" "We have a solid federal team, we have jurisdiction, and we have a tactical unit that's been briefed." Calloway's voice didn't change register when he said the next part. "We also have intelligence suggesting Helix has identified you. They know who you are, what you did in the service, and where you live. They've assessed you as a liability. Because I disrupted the first operation. Because you disrupted the first operation, and because you're still in proximity to the target." A brief pause. "We believe your cooperation serves 2 purposes. Your knowledge of advanced threat response would be valuable in planning. And frankly, Mr. Cross, bringing you inside the operation is safer for you and your son than leaving you outside it." Nathan felt something cold move through the center of his chest. Not fear exactly. He'd had a complicated relationship with fear for most of his adult life, but the specific cold weight of a door closing. The thing he'd been hoping wouldn't be true becoming demonstrably true. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course. I'd ask that you, I'll call you back today," Nathan said, "one way or the other." He hung up and stood in the bay with his hands on the hood of a car he wasn't seeing and looked at the middle distance for a long time. "Yeah, He called Vivian. He'd kept her number after the visit to the shop. He wasn't sure why, some instinct that the situation wasn't resolved even when it seemed like it was. She answered after 3 rings, and there was background noise behind her voice, the particular ambient hum of a large office floor. "Nathan," she said. She sounded unsurprised to hear from him, which suggested she'd been half expecting the call. "They told you." "Calloway briefed me this morning. The summit, the timeline, the server array." A pause. "I told my board we should postpone the demonstration. They told me postponing would signal vulnerability to our Defense Department partners and potentially void 3 contracts. So you're going." "The demonstration is going." Her voice was careful, controlled, but not entirely. There was something moving underneath it. "I want to be honest with you. I don't want you involved in this. They know where Owen goes to school," Nathan said. Vivian was quiet. "That's what Calloway didn't say explicitly, but implied," Nathan said. "If they've identified me as a liability, they'll use the most efficient leverage available. That's basic operational logic." "I know," Vivian said quietly. "I know, and I'm sorry, and I don't have words for how much I didn't want this to touch your life." "It already has." Another silence, different from the first one. The office noise behind her had diminished, like she'd walked somewhere private. "Is your son safe right now?" she said. "He's at school. I've already arranged for a friend to pick him up today and keep him at their place tonight. He doesn't know why." "What did you tell him?" "I told him his friend Marcus wanted to see him." It was true. He'd called Marcus Reyes that morning, his oldest friend, his best man, who'd left the teams 3 years before Nathan did and now lived with his wife in the same city. Marcus had asked 0 questions, which was why Nathan had called him first. "Okay," Vivian said. It came out like someone exhaling. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to call Calloway back," Nathan said, "and tell him I'm in." The next 18 days were not what Nathan had expected, and he'd learned to expect things to be worse than anticipated. He met with Calloway in person on day 2. A federal building on Whitmore Street, a conference room on the 7th floor with a view of the parking structure next door. Calloway was in his mid-40s, lean, the kind of efficient that read as humorless until you caught a moment of dry brevity and understood he was just economical. He had a team of 6, plus 2 tactical units on standby, plus the local law enforcement coordination that Rourke was handling. They went through the summit floor plan for 4 hours. The venue was the Harlow Convention Center, a large commercial space converted for high-level tech events, with a central demonstration hall, several secondary conference rooms, and a loading infrastructure that included 2 parking levels accessible from Meridian Avenue. Ashcorp's server array was scheduled to occupy a secure room on the 2nd floor, accessible from the main hall via a single stairwell and a freight elevator. "Helix will have people inside before the event starts," Nathan said, studying the floor plan. "Venue staff, catering, anyone with sustained access and limited scrutiny." "We're vetting everyone with convention center credentials," Calloway said. "They'll have cleaner credentials than you can vet." Calloway looked at him. "I'm not criticizing the process," Nathan said. "I'm telling you the gap. Helix has been operating for 11 years without a federal bust. They don't use people with records. They'll have contractors hired through shell companies. Completely clean backgrounds because the backgrounds are real people who don't know their identities are being used. So how do we find them?" "Behavior," Nathan said. "You're looking for people who know the building better than they should for how long they've been in it. People who move with purpose but change their route when observed. People who check exits." He spent the next 3 days at the convention center during the setup period, wearing a press contractor badge that Calloway's team had arranged, walking the space with the particular studied casualness of someone who had done this, learned a new environment, mapped its threat geometry, more times than he could count. He found 2 service corridors that the floor plan didn't accurately represent. He found a camera blind spot on the freight elevator level large enough to move equipment through without observation. He reported both to Calloway, who had them addressed as quietly as possible. On day 11, 3 days before the summit, Nathan came home from a late session with the federal team to find the light in Owen's room still on at 10:30. He knocked, pushed the door open. Owen was sitting up in bed with the Deep Sea Explorer drawing in his lap, and an expression that immediately told Nathan the conversation they were about to have. "Marcus's wife said something on the phone," Owen said. "She didn't mean for me to hear." Nathan came in and sat on the edge of the bed. He was tired in the deep way that accumulated over days of sustained alertness, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fully address. "What did she say?" he asked, though he had a reasonable guess. "She said she hoped you'd be careful." Owen looked at him. Why would she say that if everything was regular? Nathan looked at his son. 7 years old, 7, and already parsing the subtext of adult conversations with the precision of someone twice his age. "There's something I have to help with," Nathan said. "Something connected to what happened in December." "The men with the cars?" "Yes." Owen processed this. His hands were flat on the drawing, holding it against his knees. "Is it dangerous?" Nathan had made himself a policy, when Owen was very small, of not lying to his son about the fundamental nature of things. He could withhold detail, could calibrate what a 7-year-old needed to understand, but he wouldn't lie about the shape of the truth. "It might be," he said. Owen nodded once, sharply, like he'd been waiting for that answer, and now that he had it, he could deal with it. "Will you come back?" The question landed the way it always did when Owen asked it. Simply, without drama, without any awareness of how much weight it carried. He just wanted to know. "Yes," Nathan said. He meant it. He always meant it. He understood that meaning something and being able to guarantee it were two different categories of promise. But he'd decided years ago that there were certain things you had to say without the hedge, because the hedge itself was the wound. Owen looked at him for a long moment and then carefully put the drawing on the nightstand and lay down. "You should sleep," Owen said. "You look tired." "I am tired." "Then sleep, Dad." Nathan turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment in the dark before he went to bed. February 14th arrived the way days like that always did, not with any particular dramatic announcement, just the ordinary machinery of a morning. Nathan was up at 4:30. He made coffee, ate something, checked his gear, checked it again. He'd spent 11 years operating in conditions where the difference between a good check and a lazy one was sometimes the difference between everything. He'd been issued equipment through Callaway's team. Nothing he'd requested, everything adequate. Body armor he'd adjusted himself because the default fit was wrong across the left shoulder, the one that had taken the strain in December. A radio that ran on the federal frequency. A sidearm he'd spent 2 hours at a range getting comfortable with. He'd also brought 3 things of his own. A fixed blade that lived in a sheath on his left calf, a small flashlight with a particular beam profile he'd used for years, and a photograph of Owen in his coat pocket. Not because it served any tactical purpose, because he'd learned a long time ago to carry the thing that answered the question of why. And that night at the Harlow Grand, when he'd looked down at his son's face and made a decision, was the clearest answer to that question he'd ever had. The convention center went live at 8. Nathan was inside by 7, working with Callaway's team to finalize position assignments. The main hall was filling with Tech Summit attendees, engineers, executives, defense contractors, press with clearly marked badges. And the surface of the event looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like. Controlled, professional, secured. Underneath it, Nathan felt the specific tension of a space where something bad was planned to happen. He moved through the hall slowly, reading the room the way he'd been trained to read rooms. There were maybe 400 people, and he was not looking at most of them. He was looking at the negative space, the gaps in foot traffic, the places where someone wasn't standing who should have been, the places where someone was standing who had no clear reason to be there. He found the first one at 9:20, a man in venue staff uniform near the secondary stairwell on the east side of the hall. He was standing with a clipboard, which was correct for his apparent role, but he'd been in the same 12-foot radius for 40 minutes without interacting with anyone or referring to the clipboard once. His eyes moved in a specific pattern, not the scattered attention of someone bored in a job they didn't care about, but the focused, disciplined sweep of someone counting something. Nathan relayed the position to Callaway. "We see him," Callaway said in the earpiece. "Stand by." 2 of Callaway's plainclothes people moved toward the man at a pace that wouldn't attract attention. Nathan kept moving. He found the second one at 9:51, near the freight elevator on the second level. This one was harder. Dressed as a tech vendor, badge and equipment case, completely plausible at a technology summit. What was wrong was the equipment case. It was too light. Nathan could tell by the way the man carried it. Empty cases have a specific relationship to the arm that holds them, a slight unconscious adjustment for the absence of expected weight, and this man's arm wasn't making that adjustment. Second floor freight elevator, vendor badge, gray jacket, equipment case. He's carrying something in the case, but it's not what the badge says. Copy, Calloway said. Don't approach. I know. The summit's scheduled demonstration was at 11. At 10:30, the communications in Nathan's earpiece went briefly and completely silent. Not static, not interference, a deliberate signal block. He recognized it immediately. Calloway? He said. Nothing. He looked around the second level. The vendors near the server room access point had thinned, not dramatically, but enough. Two of Calloway's visible people on the floor were no longer where they'd been 10 minutes ago. Nathan moved to the stairwell. He came out on the second level and found the freight elevator doors open and a federal agent on the floor inside with zip ties at his wrists and a bruise forming along his jaw that said he'd been hit from behind. Not dead. Nathan checked pulse first, but out. He took the agent's backup radio, which ran on a different frequency. Calloway, he said into the backup. Cross, we've had a signal block 2 minutes ago. We lost 3 people on the second floor. Calloway's voice was compressed, urgent in the way of someone managing a situation that had moved faster than planned. Helix has a team in the server room. They're already inside. How many? We think 4, maybe 5. I'm on the second floor. Cross, the tactical unit is 4 minutes out. 4 minutes is a long time, Nathan said. A pause. Calloway knew what Nathan was telling him. Don't go in alone. I'm going to assess the situation, Nathan said, which was technically not a lie. He moved down the second floor corridor toward the server room access. The hallway was empty. Cleared, Nathan realized, which meant Helix had people controlling the approach. He checked 2 doors and found the second one unlocked and used it to come at the server room from the side corridor rather than the main approach. He heard voices before he reached the door. 2 men, maybe 3. The specific low-register exchange of people working against a clock. He pressed against the wall and listened for 10 seconds, picked up what he could about positions and numbers, and then moved. 3 men inside, one at the server array with a device plugged into the primary port, one at the door on the far side covering the main corridor entrance, one in the center of the room with a weapon drawn, watching the work being done. Nathan came in fast through the side door before any of them had fully processed that it had opened. What followed was not the choreographed sequence of an action sequence. It was ugly and loud and lasted less than 40 seconds, and Nathan took an elbow to the nose somewhere in the second half of it that produced an immediate flood of pain and made his eyes water badly enough that he was operating partially on instinct. He got the man at the server array away from the equipment, which was the primary objective, and he got the weapon away from the center man, which was the secondary objective, and the third man, the one at the far door, had his weapon up, and there was a frozen moment of approximately 1 second where Nathan was on the wrong end of a situation with no good resolution. The door behind him opened. Calloway came through it with 2 tactical officers behind him, and that second resolved itself in a direction that didn't require Nathan to do anything further. He sat down on the floor of the server room with his back against the equipment rack and pressed the back of his hand against his nose and looked at the ceiling while Calloway's team secured the 3 men and checked the server array for the extraction device. You said you were going to assess, Calloway said, standing over him. I assessed, Nathan said. The situation required intervention. Calloway looked at him for a long moment. He had the expression of a man who wanted to deliver a substantive critique and had concluded that the timing was suboptimal. Your nose is broken. I know. There's a 4th Helix operative on the ground floor that my team just picked up. 5th one tried to run through the parking level and didn't get far. Calloway crouched down to Nathan's level, which Nathan interpreted as a gesture toward equal footing. The server array is intact. Whatever Helix sent that device to extract, they didn't get it. Nathan nodded. The pain was settling into a steady pounding rhythm that he'd learned to treat as information rather than crisis. "My son," Nathan said. "Marcus Reyes has him. We've had a car outside Reyes' address since last night." Calloway put a hand briefly on Nathan's shoulder. "The good one." "He's fine." Nathan leaned his head back against the equipment rack and let out a breath that had probably been held in some form since February 14th began. From 3 floors below, muffled by concrete and distance, he could hear the sounds of a technology summit continuing. 400 people who didn't know that the second floor of the convention center had spent the last 8 minutes being a completely different kind of event. The ordinariness of the sounds, voices, movement, the distant register of a presentation beginning, was almost surreal against the specific reality of the floor Nathan was sitting on. Calloway stood. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then come with me. There's going to be a significant amount of paperwork." "There always is," Nathan said. He got up. It took him a moment. The knee he'd landed on was complaining, and the nose was conducting a full argument. But he got up, because getting up was what you did, and he followed Calloway out of the server room and into the hallway, where the lights were fluorescent and ordinary, and the carpet was the bland corporate pattern of every convention center he'd ever been in. And somewhere outside this building, his son was eating cereal at Marcus's kitchen table and drawing deep-sea creatures, and not knowing yet that the thing his father had told him would be true had, in fact, turned out to be true. He was coming back. He pulled out his phone and typed a text to Marcus. "Tell him I'm on my way." Marcus replied in 30 seconds. "He's been asking every 10 minutes. I told him you were fine. He said, 'I know.'" Nathan looked at that for a moment. "I know." 7 years old, and already the most certain person Nathan had ever met. He put the phone back in his pocket and went to deal with the paperwork. The paperwork took until 8 o'clock that evening. Nathan sat in a federal building conference room on Whitmore Street and answered the same questions in different configurations for 5 hours, while his nose swelled to approximately twice its normal size, and a medic who'd been called in applied a temporary splint and told him he needed an X-ray, which Nathan acknowledged and did not pursue. Calloway moved in and out of the room, bringing coffee at one point without being asked, which Nathan interpreted as either professional courtesy or an apology for the 4 minutes is a long time conversation, and possibly both. At 6:30, 2 Department of Justice attorneys arrived, and the question shifted from tactical to legal. What Nathan had witnessed, what he'd done, the precise sequence of events in the server room. He answered everything accurately. He had no reason not to. He'd done nothing he was ashamed of, and nothing he needed to obscure. At 7:50, Calloway came in and sat down across from him and told him that all 5 Helix operatives were in federal custody, that the 2 senior members of the organization's leadership structure had been picked up at their hotel on the other side of the city within the hour, and that the Bureau's assessment was that the operational capacity of Helix as an active threat was, for practical purposes, finished. "The data they were after," Nathan said. "It's secure?" "Intact. The extraction device didn't complete its cycle." Calloway set a folder on the table that he didn't open. "Ms. Ashford has been briefed. Her security team is with her now." "Good." Calloway studied him for a moment. "You understand there are people in this building who want to offer you a position. Tell them I'm a mechanic." "I did. They said they'd heard that." Nathan looked at him. "You'd be well compensated," Calloway said. Not pushing, exactly. More like a man who felt professionally obligated to complete the sentence he'd started. "I have a shop," Nathan said. "I have a 7-year-old. I have a transmission that's been sitting half rebuilt on a lift for 2 weeks because I've been spending my evenings in federal conference rooms." He stood up, and the knee protested, and he let it. "I appreciate the thought." Calloway stood with him and extended his hand. Nathan shook it. "Your son," Calloway said. "He's a good kid." "He is. Marcus Reyes brought him by this afternoon. While you were in debrief, he waited in the lobby for about an hour, your son, and spent the whole time explaining to the receptionist why the anglerfish is an underappreciated species." Nathan absorbed this. "What did the receptionist think?" "She seemed genuinely interested." Calloway almost smiled. "He's at Reyes' place. Reyes said to take your time." Nathan took a cab to Marcus's apartment because his truck was still at the convention center, and he wasn't ready to deal with that tonight. The city moved past the windows in the February dark. Streetlights, closed storefronts, the particular emptiness of a weeknight at 8 in a commercial district. And Nathan sat in the back seat with his taped nose and his aching knee, and the photograph still in his coat pocket, and felt, with some surprise, the slow unwinding of a tension that had been constant for the past 18 days. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the moment after you set down something heavy. Not euphoria, just the sudden awareness of what your arms had been doing. Marcus opened the apartment door before Nathan knocked, which meant he'd been watching from the window, which was a Marcus thing. He took one look at Nathan's face and said, "I'm not going to say anything about the nose." "Thank you. It looks bad." "You said you weren't going to say anything." "I said I wasn't going to say anything. That was a medical observation." Marcus stepped back to let him in. The apartment smelled like something had been cooked recently. Real food, the kind that took effort, and Nathan was suddenly aware that he hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning. "He's in the guest room. He was awake until 20 minutes ago and then crashed mid-sentence. I think the adrenaline of waiting finally ran out." Nathan went down the short hall and opened the guest room door quietly. Owen was asleep sideways across the guest bed, still in his clothes from the day, one shoe on, and one shoe apparently lost somewhere in the bedding. He'd clearly been drawing. There was a sketchbook open on the pillow beside him, and a pencil still loosely in his fingers that Marcus or his wife had apparently decided wasn't worth the risk of removing. Nathan stood in the doorway for a long moment. He was not a man who cried easily. He'd learned to process difficult things internally, in the quiet hours, in ways that didn't produce visible symptoms. But standing there, looking at his son asleep with a pencil in his hand and one shoe, he felt something move through him that was large and ungainly and didn't have a clean name. He crossed the room, carefully lifted the pencil from Owen's fingers, set it on the nightstand. He worked the remaining shoe off without waking the boy. He pulled the blanket up from the foot of the bed and laid it over him. Then he sat in the chair in the corner of the room and let his son's breathing be the only sound for a while. He didn't call Vivian for 4 days. He wasn't avoiding her exactly. He needed the 4 days to do certain things in a certain order. Get Owen back to school and back to his regular schedule, get the truck from the convention center, get back into the shop and apologize to Danny for the 2 weeks of disrupted workflow, take the transmission off the lift and actually finish it. Eat food that wasn't purchased in haste from the nearest available source. Sleep more than 4 hours. He also needed to let his nose hurt for a few days without being asked about it. It was broken. He got the X-ray eventually, at Owen's insistence, because Owen had noticed the bruising under his eyes and deployed a look of such sustained concern that Nathan had concluded the path of least resistance was the urgent care clinic on Thursday afternoon, and the attending physician confirmed the fracture and told him it would heal without intervention and to stop hitting things with his face. "I didn't hit anything with my face," Nathan said. "Something hit your face." Semantically different. The doctor had given him a look that said he'd heard similar distinctions before and was not moved by them. On the 4th day, he called Vivian from the shop's back office after Danny had gone home and the building was quiet. She answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when you were going to call." 4 days, Nathan said. "I needed 4 days." "That's fair." A pause. "How's Owen?" "Back to normal. Better than normal. He's decided the anglerfish is his spirit animal, for reasons that I haven't fully tracked." She laughed. It was a short, genuine sound, not the polished version that appeared in profile coverage and keynote speeches. "How are you?" "Broken nose? Bad knee?" "The shoulder's okay, actually, which is the one I was most worried about." "Nathan." Her voice dropped a register, not dramatically, just enough. "I watched the convention center footage, the server room. Calloway showed me." He'd assumed Calloway would. He didn't say anything. "You went in there alone," she said. "The tactical team was 4 minutes out." "I know what Calloway said. I also know what the footage showed." A pause. "I've been sitting with this for 4 days too. With what it means that you did that. What it cost. It needed to be done. A lot of things need to be done. Not everyone does them." She stopped. Then, "I don't know how to be grateful enough. I've run out of vocabulary for it." "You don't owe me vocabulary," Nathan said. "You owe me what you said in the shop. Do the work right. Do it honestly." "I remember." "Then we're still good." Another pause, different from the previous ones, the kind that had a question forming in it. "Can I see you?" Vivian said. "Not, I'm not asking for anything. I'd like to see you in person. Is that strange?" Nathan looked at the wall of his back office, the shelf with the shop's registration papers, and the manual for the diagnostic scanner, and the coffee mug Owen had painted for him in second grade that said Dad in large uneven letters. Ordinary things, all of them, the specific weight of an ordinary life. "No," he said, "it's not strange." They met on a Saturday, the first Saturday in March, in a park on the east side of the city that neither of them had been to before. Nathan had suggested it without entirely knowing why. Some instinct that neutral ground mattered, that neither of them should be on home territory for whatever this conversation was. Vivian came in the same unobtrusive sedan. She was wearing jeans and a coat he hadn't seen before, and no jewelry except a watch, and she looked more like the woman from the shop waiting room than the woman from the magazine covers, which he found was a relief. They walked for a while before either of them said much. The park had a path around a small lake, and the March air was cold but tolerable. And there were other people there, families, a few runners, a woman with 2 large dogs who were conducting their own separate agenda, and the ordinary presence of other lives moving at their own pace was somehow exactly right. "I've been thinking about what you said," Vivian said eventually, "in the waiting room, about Owen's world, about doing the work honestly." "And?" "I've been doing the work. I think I've been doing it well. But I've also been doing it in a particular way. Very fast, very driven, very focused on the outcome." She had her hands in her coat pockets, and she was looking at the path ahead rather than at him, which he understood was the way some people talked about things that required some distance to say. "I'm not sure I've always thought enough about the how, the way the things get built, not just whether they get built. That's a hard thing to sit with when you've had a lot of success." "It is." She glanced at him. "You said that very gently for someone who was essentially agreeing with my self-criticism." "I wasn't agreeing with it entirely. You built something real. That matters. I just think the version of it you described, the one you want to build going forward, sounds better." She was quiet for a moment. "You're surprisingly easy to talk to." "People tell me that, usually while being surprised by it." "Do they?" "Danny, my employee, said it took him 3 months to realize he'd told me his entire life story over the course of oil changes and brake jobs. He said it happened in pieces, and he didn't notice until it was complete." Vivian smiled. The genuine one. The small one that changed her face. "That sounds like something Owen would do." "Owen does exactly that. He gives you information in installments, and by the time you've got the full picture, you're already committed." They walked another half lap around the lake. A kid on a bicycle passed them at high speed and then wobbled dangerously and recovered, and both Nathan and Vivian tracked the wobble with the particular attention of people who'd spent time being responsible for other people's physical safety. "I want to do something," Vivian said, "with the resources I have, something that isn't just about the company." She stopped walking and turned to face him, and there was something slightly careful about the way she did it, as if she'd rehearsed this part and was now departing from the script. "You work with veterans. In that community program you created. I looked it up." Nathan had not expected that. "It's not much of a program. It's a garage space 3 evenings a week where guys can come work on things. Cars, mostly. Sometimes other things." "It's more than that," Vivian said. "I talked to some of the men who come. I hope that's okay. I was trying to understand." He looked at her. "You talked to them." "I went there 2 weeks ago, Tuesday evening." She didn't flinch from his expression, whatever it was. "I know I should have asked you first. I wanted to understand what it was before I talked to you about it, because I didn't want to come to you with half a picture." Nathan absorbed the fact that Vivian Ashford had gone to his Tuesday evening veterans garage without telling him, had talked to the men there, had formed an opinion, and was now delivering all of this to him in a park by a lake on a Saturday morning with the directness of someone who had decided the honest approach was the only approach worth taking. He found he couldn't be entirely annoyed by it. "What did they tell you?" he said. "Hector told me you helped him find his son after 3 years of no contact. You spent 4 months navigating the family court system with him, and you didn't tell anyone about it." A pause. James said you gave him work at the shop when he had nowhere to go, and that you never treated it like charity, and that distinction mattered more to him than the work itself. She was watching him steadily. Dale said you just show up, every Tuesday, every Thursday, that you haven't missed once in 4 years. Nathan looked at the lake. A mallard was doing something with determined futility near the far bank. They exaggerate, he said. Some things can't be exaggerated. He didn't answer that. I want to fund it properly, Vivian said. Not publicly, not with a press release or a corporate social responsibility announcement. Just money, going to the right place, no strings, no brand attached. A proper space, materials, a counselor on site if the men want access to one. She paused. And I want to help. Not write checks and disappear. Actually help. Nathan turned from the lake to look at her. You want to come fix cars 3 evenings a week. I don't know how to fix cars. I could learn. She said it straightforwardly, not as a joke, not as a gesture, as a statement of fact about an intention. Or I could do other things. Administrative things. Outreach. Finding other organizations with veterans programs and building networks between them. Things that I actually know how to do. He studied her. The cold air was putting color in her face, and she looked in this light with this coat and these jeans and this expression, like someone who had made a decision she was entirely comfortable with and was waiting calmly to see how it was received. Why? He said. She considered the question like she'd been expecting it. Because what you said in the shop changed something in me. I've been asking myself since December what I'm building and for whom. Your answer was simple in a way that was harder to absorb than a complicated one. She looked at him. You asked me to make the world safer for your son. I've been thinking about what that actually means, not just in terms of cybersecurity infrastructure, but in terms of the kind of people and communities and systems that exist in the world he's going to live in. Your garage on Tuesday evenings is part of that answer. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. It's not my garage, he said finally. I rent it by the month from a man named Kowalski, who runs a plumbing supply warehouse next door and who lets me use the space for $100 a month because his own father was a veteran and nobody helped him. Kowalski sounds like a good man. He is. He brings donuts on the first Tuesday of every month and then talks about the Cubs for 45 minutes. Vivian almost laughed. I'd like to meet him. The thing was, Nathan realized, that he believed her. He'd spent enough time in proximity to people who said things they didn't mean, and people who meant things they didn't say to know the difference by now, and Vivian Ashford was the second kind. The directness that had surprised him when she'd shown up in his waiting room was not performance. It was just how she was put together. She said what she thought because she'd apparently decided at some point that the alternative was a waste of everyone's time. Okay, he said. Okay, meaning come on Tuesday, 6 o'clock. Bring work clothes because the garage is not clean. He started walking again. After a moment, she fell into step beside him. And I'll need to explain to the men that you're coming. Some of them are private people. Of course. And you can't write a check the first week or the second. You just come and you're a person there, not a donor. Understood. And Kowalski will talk to you about the Cubs. I know nothing about baseball. That doesn't matter to Kowalski. He's not really talking about baseball. She looked at him sideways. What is he talking about? His father, mostly. Loss? Time passing. Same things most people are talking about when they're talking about sports. Nathan looked ahead at the path curving around the lake's far end. You learn to listen to the thing underneath the thing. Vivian walked beside him and didn't say anything for a moment, and then she said quietly, Owen taught you that, didn't he? Nathan thought about it. Owen, and 14 years of working with men who didn't always know how to say what they needed to say. He paused. And Elena. It was the first time he'd said her name to Vivian. He felt the particular quality of air that always came with it. Not grief exactly, not anymore, but the weight of a permanent absence that you learn to carry at a different angle over time. Your wife, Vivian said. Not a question, just acknowledgement. Yes. You don't have to. I know. He put his hands in his coat pockets. She was better at listening than anyone I've ever met. She could hear the thing underneath the thing without any effort at all. It came naturally to her. I had to learn it. He paused. Owen got it from her. Vivian nodded slowly. They finished the loop around the lake in comfortable silence and stood at the park's exit for a moment in the cold March air, both of them looking back at the water with the particular quality of attention you gave to things you'd found unexpectedly pleasant. Same time next Saturday, she said. If you want. I want. She walked back to her car, and Nathan walked back to his truck, and he sat for a moment before starting the engine, not thinking about anything in particular, just sitting with the specific temperature of the day and the sound of the park behind him, and the feeling that something had shifted in a direction he hadn't planned for. So spring came in increments, the way it always did. Not as a dramatic change, but as an accumulation of small evidence, warmer mornings by degrees, the trees on Clement Street putting out their first cautious leaves, the quality of afternoon light through the shop's bay windows shifting from the flat gray of winter to something with more gold in it. Vivian came to the garage on Tuesday evenings, and then on Thursdays, and after the third week she stopped being a guest and became a fixture in the quiet way that people become fixtures when they consistently show up and consistently do what they said they'd do without making a production of it. She learned to sort fasteners, a tedious task that nobody particularly wanted, and she did it without complaint, sitting on an upturned crate with a bin of hardware, working through it methodically while conversations happened around her. The men received her initially with the specific wariness of people who had good reasons to be skeptical of outsiders with resources. Hector was polite, but not warm. James barely acknowledged her the first 2 weeks. Dale, who was the most socially fluid of the regulars, a former Marine with a large laugh and a complicated history that he distributed in small portions, was the first one to actually talk to her, asking on the third Tuesday where she'd grown up, which became a 20-minute conversation about the difference between the mid-Atlantic states and the Midwest that Nathan overheard in pieces from under a car. By April, she was bringing coffee on Tuesdays. Not as a gesture, she'd simply noticed the shop's coffee situation and addressed it with the same practical efficiency she apparently brought to everything, arriving with a thermos and cups without announcement or expectation of comment. Kowalski talked to her about the Cubs for 35 minutes on the first Tuesday of March. Nathan watched from across the garage. Vivian sat on a folding chair and listened with full attention, asking occasional questions that were genuine rather than politely constructed. And at one point, Kowalski said something that made her laugh, the short, genuine sound. And Kowalski's expression afterward was the expression of a man who had been heard. After Kowalski left that evening, Vivian found Nathan at the parts sink and said, his father died when he was 14. Watching the Cubs was the last thing they did together. I know, Nathan said. How long did it take you to know that? About 4 months. He dried his hands on a shop rag. You got there faster. She looked at him. He told me because he knew I was listening. Nathan hung the rag on the hook by the sink. That's the point of the whole thing, he said. This garage, all of it. It's just a place where people can be listened to. Vivian looked around the space, the cars, the tools, the industrial lighting, the crate she'd been sitting on for 2 months sorting fasteners, the folding chairs and the thermos, and the men who came and went and came back. You built something real, she said, using his own words back at him, and he recognized them. He didn't deflect it. Yeah, he said. I did. Owen met Vivian for the first time on a Saturday in mid-April, in circumstances Nathan had not particularly orchestrated. He'd brought Owen to the shop in the morning because Owen had Saturday plans with Marcus that had been canceled, and Vivian had stopped by unexpectedly to drop off some paperwork related to a funding structure she'd been quietly working on with an attorney. She came through the front door and found Nathan behind the counter and Owen sitting on the parts counter eating a granola bar with the Deep Sea Explorer sketchbook open on his knees, working on what appeared to be an elaborate octopus. The three of them existed in the same room for a moment in which nobody said anything. Then Owen looked at Vivian and said, "Are you the lady from the hotel?" Vivian glanced at Nathan. Nathan made a small gesture that meant, "Go ahead." "Yes," Vivian said. "I am. You must be Owen." "Your dad talks about you a lot," Owen said. Vivian looked at Nathan again, this time with an expression that had warmth in it and also something slightly amused. "Does he?" He talks about everything a normal amount except you, Owen clarified, with the devastating precision of a child who had not yet learned to soften observations. He talks about you more, which I think means he thinks about you. Nathan set down the wrench he was holding. Owen. I'm just observing, Owen said in a tone that precisely reproduced the register Nathan used when he said the same phrase, which Nathan found both impressive and inconvenient. Owen turned back to his sketchbook. I'm drawing a giant Pacific octopus. They're the largest species. They can open jars. I didn't know that, Vivian said. Almost no one does. He turned the sketchbook toward her. What do you think? She looked at the drawing for a genuine moment. I think the arms are very accurate, she said. How many does it have in the drawing? Owen counted. 7, but they have 8. I miscounted. He frowned at the page. That's going to bother me. But add the 8th on the right side, Vivian said. There's room. Owen looked at the page, found the space she meant, and added the arm with 3 careful strokes. He looked at it. That's better. He went back to shading and said without looking up, You can come to dinner sometime if you want. Dad makes good pasta. Nathan looked at the ceiling briefly. Vivian was looking at him with an expression he now recognized well enough to read. The small, complicated smile that changed her face, operating at about 1/3 of its usual intensity, which was somehow more affecting than the full version. Thank you, she said to Owen. I'd like that. She came to dinner on a Wednesday in late April. She brought flowers, which Owen immediately appropriated and put in a glass on the kitchen table because he said the kitchen needed more color, a critique he'd apparently been developing for some time and had simply been waiting for someone to validate. Nathan made pasta and it was fine. Good enough, not remarkable. And Owen talked for 45 minutes about cephalopod intelligence, and Vivian ate everything on her plate and asked questions that were real questions rather than the performative interest of an adult tolerating a child's obsession. After dinner, Owen went to do homework, and Nathan and Vivian sat at the kitchen table with the leftover wine and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Helix or cybersecurity or the events of December and February, about where they'd each grown up, about the ways the places you came from shaped you in ways you didn't notice until you tried to explain them to someone else, about what they'd each been wrong about in their 30s, that they'd been certain about in their 20s. She'd grown up in the Mid-Atlantic, a middle child of 5 in a family with more ambition than money, which had produced both the drive and the specific kind of resourcefulness Nathan had observed from the first. She'd started her company at 24, with her own savings, and a co-founder she'd had to buy out 3 years later because they'd had fundamentally different visions of what the company was for. What was the difference? Nathan asked. He thought it was for making money. I thought it was for making the money mean something. She turned her wine glass in her hands. We were both right in a way. You need one for the other, but you need to know which one comes first. Which one comes first? She looked at him. The meaning. Always the meaning. At 9:30, Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway in pajamas, announced that his homework was done, and that he had decided the octopus drawing was finished and that he was going to bed, and then looked at Vivian and said, with complete seriousness, You should come to dinner again. The pasta is usually this good. After he was gone, Vivian set down her wine glass and looked at Nathan with the expression of someone who had something to say and was working out how to say it. He's extraordinary, she said. I know. He's lonely in a way he doesn't know how to name. You can see it in how he holds on to conversations. She said it carefully, not as a criticism, as an observation. He's got you and Marcus and school, but he wants more people in the house. Nathan was quiet. It was true, and he knew it. And he'd been knowing it in the way you knew things you weren't ready to address. He doesn't say that. He says it constantly, Vivian said gently, just not in those words. Nathan looked at the kitchen table. The flowers Owen had put in the glass, slightly crooked in their arrangement because Owen had done it with enthusiasm rather than precision, and the pasta plates Vivian had helped stack near the sink, and the sketchbook left open on the counter, the octopus complete with its 8th arm. He looked at all of it, and then he looked at Vivian Ashford sitting at his kitchen table in April in the lamplight, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time and had not expected to feel again in this particular way, in this specific configuration of an ordinary Wednesday evening. I'm not good at this, he said. at whatever this is becoming. Neither am I, she said. I'm controlling, I overwork, I have approximately 4 friends, and I've been told I'm difficult to know. She paused. I'm also not leaving. Nathan considered that. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. It was not a declaration. It was not the kind of moment that would make a good scene in a film. It was just 2 people at a kitchen table agreeing, with some understanding of what they were agreeing to keep showing up. Which was, Nathan had come to understand the whole of it. Not the dramatic gesture, not the grand pronouncement, just the consistent, unspectacular decision to be present, made again on the next day, and the one after that, until it became the fact of your life. Outside the kitchen window, the April evening had gone full dark. The streetlight on Clement caught the new leaves on the trees, and somewhere down the block someone was walking a dog. And the city made its ordinary sounds, and Nathan Cross sat at his kitchen table with someone unexpected and felt, with some caution and some honesty and a fair amount of gratitude for the specific improbability of it, that he was, against all prior planning, glad. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, 11 months after a snowy December evening outside the Harlow Grand had changed the direction of 3 lives. It came in a plain white envelope addressed in handwriting Nathan didn't recognize. Neat, slightly formal, the kind of penmanship that suggested someone who'd been taught to write properly and had kept the habit. His name and the shop's address, nothing else on the outside. Inside, a single card with a date, a time, an address in the city's East Quarter, and 4 words at the bottom. Please come. V. He turned the card over. Nothing on the back. Danny looked at it from across the bay with the expression of someone exercising considerable restraint. You going to tell me what that is? No, Nathan said, and put the card in his coat pocket. He already knew he was going. He'd known from the first line of the address, the Kellner building on Ashmont Street, a converted warehouse that housed, among other things, the regional office of a veterans reintegration nonprofit that Vivian had been quietly partnering with since June. He'd helped make 2 introductions that had led to that partnership, and he knew the building, had been there twice for planning meetings, and had noted each time the particular quality of the space, high ceilings, good light, the kind of room that felt larger than its dimensions because someone had thought carefully about what it was for. The date was Saturday, 4 days away. He didn't ask Vivian about it. She'd sent the invitation in a plain envelope by hand, which was its own kind of statement, and he understood that asking about it in advance would be the wrong move, would miss the point of the gesture, whatever the point was. So he put the card on the kitchen table where he could see it in the evenings, and he let it sit there. And on Thursday night, Owen picked it up and read it and set it back down with an expression that Nathan could not immediately decode. You know what this is, Nathan said. It was not a question. Owen arranged his face into the portrait of innocence that he'd been deploying with variable success since approximately age 4. I'm 8. I don't know about adult things. Owen. I really think you should just go, Owen said, and returned to his homework with the focused attention of someone who had concluded the conversation. Nathan looked at his son, 8 years old now, slightly taller than he'd been in December, the baby roundness in his face mostly gone, and recognized the expression. It was the same one Elena used to make when she knew something Nathan didn't and had decided that the knowing wasn't hers to give away, that some things had to arrive on their own schedule. He put the card back on the table and let Thursday become Friday and Friday become Saturday. He arrived at the Kellner building at 6:50, 10 minutes before the time on the card. The parking lot had more cars in it than he'd expected, 40, maybe 50 vehicles, the kind of turnout that suggested this was not a small gathering. Through the building's large industrial windows, he could see light and movement inside, the particular configuration of a room that had been arranged for an event. He sat in the truck for a moment. He was wearing the dark jacket Owen had insisted on. You can't wear the gray one. It has an oil stain near the pocket that you think isn't visible, but it is. And the one decent pair of shoes he owned that weren't work boots. And he'd made an attempt at his hair that Owen had inspected and approved with the air of a director signing off on a final cut. You look fine, Owen had said. You're 8. You look fine, Dad. He got out of the truck. The inside of the Kellner building had been transformed from the spare, functional space he remembered. not extravagantly. Nothing about this felt like a corporate event or a fundraising gala, nothing with that particular glossy impersonality. Instead, it felt like someone had taken a room and filled it with the evidence of actual lives. Along one wall, photographs, large, well-printed, candid photographs of men and women at work, at meals, in conversation. Some of them in the veteran's garage on Clement Street that Nathan immediately recognized, others in spaces he didn't know. Tables arranged without the rigid geometry of formal events. Real food, the kind that came from effort. A small sound system playing something low enough that you could talk over it. And people. Everywhere people. He recognized some of them immediately. Hector, standing near the far wall with a woman Nathan had seen in photographs. His son beside him, a teenager now. The reconciliation Nathan had spent 4 months helping navigate, now visible in the simple fact of them standing together in the same room. James, who'd worked at the shop for 8 months, and now ran his own small detailing business out of a rented space 2 blocks from the Clement Street garage. Dale, the former Marine, laughing at something with a man Nathan didn't know. There were others he didn't recognize. Oh, men and women with the particular bearing of people who had served, some with the additional quality of people who had come through something difficult and were still in the process of finding out who they were on the other side of it. There were families, children. A table near the windows where 4 kids were doing something with a large piece of paper and markers. Kowalski found him first. "Cross," he said, appearing from somewhere to Nathan's left with a glass of something and the expression of a man who was enjoying a secret he'd been keeping for some time. "You look confused." "What is this?" Nathan said. "Come on," Kowalski said, not answering. "There's food." He was steered, gently, by Kowalski's hand at his shoulder, toward the center of the room, and in the process he passed Dale, who clasped his hand and didn't say anything, and James, who nodded at him with an expression that communicated more than most people managed in full sentences, and Hector, who said only Nathan, and then pulled him briefly into the kind of embrace that men who don't usually embrace offer when the occasion is large enough to require it. He was still taking in the room when the sound system softened and the quality of attention in the space shifted. The particular change in a crowd when something is about to happen. Vivian was standing on the low platform at the room's far end. She was wearing dark blue, not the boardroom version of dark blue, something quieter, and her hair was down, and she had no notes in her hand, which Nathan suspected was a considered choice. She looked standing there in front of the room like the most composed person he'd ever seen, and simultaneously like someone holding something large with both hands and trying not to show the effort. "I'm not going to make a long speech," she said, and the room settled into listening. "I'm not good at long speeches, and the people in this room don't need one." She paused. "A year ago, on a cold night in December, a man I'd never met made a decision that saved my life. I've been thinking about that decision for 12 months. Not the physical part of it, not the logistics of what he did, but the fact of it. The fact that a person who had every reason to walk past a stranger's problem chose not to." The room was completely quiet now. What I didn't understand that night, and have been slowly understanding since, is that the decision he made wasn't unusual for him. He makes that decision constantly. He makes it on Tuesday evenings and Thursday evenings in a garage on Clement Street. He makes it when a man he barely knows needs 4 months of help navigating a court system. He makes it when he shows up again and again for people who have been given a lot of reasons not to trust that anyone will. She looked at the room, not at Nathan, at the room, at the people in it. Everything you see here tonight was built by that consistency, not by grand gestures, not by resources or connections, by a man who decided that showing up was the most important thing he could do and then did it without stopping. Nathan was very still. "I want you to know," Vivian said, and now she was looking at him, directly at him across the room, "that the programs represented in this building tonight, the funding, the partnerships, the 37 men and women whose reintegration support has been structured or expanded in the last 8 months, none of it came from me. I wrote checks and made calls and used what I have. But the architecture of it, the reason it works, is his. Because he showed me what it was supposed to look like." She paused. "You rescued me that night, but what you did afterward taught me how to actually use the life I had left." The room was quiet for a moment that held something Nathan couldn't name. Then Hector started clapping, and it spread through the room the way things spread when they're genuine rather than performed. And Nathan stood in the middle of it with his hands at his sides and felt the specific, uncomfortable fullness of being seen by people whose seeing meant something, which was a different experience entirely from the news coverage and the mystery hero headlines and all the noise of the previous December that he'd deflected without difficulty. This he couldn't deflect. These were his people. He knew their names. He'd sat with their problems and their silences and their incremental progress and their setbacks. Being seen by them was a different category of exposure than being seen by strangers. He looked at Vivian. She was watching him with the small, complicated expression he'd learned over 11 months. The one that wasn't a smile exactly, but contained one. He looked at Owen, who materialized from somewhere near the table with the children and markers. Of course Owen had known. Of course Owen had been here already, which explained everything about Thursday evening's performance of Innocence. And who was standing near the edge of the crowd with his arms crossed in the characteristic posture and an expression of complete satisfaction that Nathan recognized as the specific look of someone whose plan has come together. He looked around the room at the accumulated evidence of the last year. Not just the photographs and the people, but the particular quality of the air in a room where people had come together around something real. He thought about a snowy December evening and a small hand tightening around his, and a decision made in the space of 3 seconds that had not felt like a choice at the time, had felt like the only available action, and how strange it was that the things which changed the direction of your life most completely were often the things you barely experienced as decisions at all. He crossed the room. Vivian stepped down from the platform and met him at the edge of it, and for a moment they just stood facing each other in the middle of the room with the noise of other people's conversation surrounding them like weather. "You could have told me," he said. "You would have told me not to do it." "Probably." "Definitely." The small, complicated expression. "Are you angry?" He thought about it honestly. "No?" "Good." He reached into his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying what was in it for 6 weeks, had picked it up from a jeweler on a Thursday afternoon in October after a Tuesday evening at the garage when he'd watched Vivian sit with Dale for 40 minutes while Dale talked about his daughter, whom he hadn't seen in 2 years, and had seen in Vivian's face not patience or performed compassion, but something genuine and unglamorous and completely present. He'd understood something clearly in that moment that he'd been understanding slowly for months, and the following Thursday he'd gone to the jeweler. He'd told no one, not Owen, which had required active misdirection, a rare event, not Marcus, not Kowalski, who could not reliably keep a secret for longer than 10 days, which Nathan knew from experience. He took her hand. Vivian looked down at their joined hands and then back up at him, and he saw the moment she understood what was happening. The slight shift in her expression, the way she went very still and the way she went still when she was paying complete attention to something. "I'm not good at this," he said. He'd said those words to her before, at the kitchen table in April. She'd said she wasn't leaving. "I'm still not good at it. I'm going to keep being someone who works on cars and shows up at a garage 3 evenings a week and forgets to buy groceries on Thursdays and doesn't talk about things as quickly as I probably should." "I know," she said. "I'm also not going anywhere." "Nathan, is that enough?" She looked at him, and what was in her expression was not the controlled public composure or the boardroom certainty or even the small, complicated smile he'd cataloged over 11 months. It was something simpler and less defended than any of those. The expression of a person who had spent a long time moving fast and had found, without planning for it, a place where it was possible to stop. "Ask me," she said quietly. He opened his hand. The ring was simple. He'd spent 2 hours in the jeweler's making sure of that, rejecting everything that announced itself, until he found the one that didn't. She looked at it for a moment. He knelt. He heard the room change around them, the conversations dying down in concentric rings outward from where they stood as people noticed, then the particular silence of a crowd holding its breath. And he was aware of all of it and not particularly bothered by it, which surprised him. He'd spent a year finding reasons to stay out of the spotlight, and here he was on one knee in a room full of people, and what he felt was not exposure but something close to its opposite, something like the clarity of a moment where the right action and the true feeling were the same thing. "Vivian," he said, I spent 6 years being very certain about what my life was and what it was going to continue to be. I was wrong, and I'm glad I was wrong. You're not what I planned for. Owen is not what I planned for either, and he's the best thing in my life. I'm starting to think that the things I didn't plan for are the only ones that have actually mattered." He paused. "Will you marry me?" It wasn't quite a question by the end. It came out more like a statement of intention, which was probably accurate to what it was. Vivian Ashford looked at him kneeling on the floor of the Kellner building in front of 40-some-odd veterans and their families, and Kowalski, who was crying without any apparent embarrassment, and she said, "Yes," simply, without hesitation, without the pause that would have suggested calculation, just the clean note of a decision already made arriving at its moment of expression. He stood. He put the ring on her finger. It fit, because he'd asked Owen for her ring size 3 months ago. Owen had gotten the information through means he'd declined to specify, and Nathan had decided not to pursue the methodology. The room reacted the way rooms reacted to such things, with noise and movement, and Kowalski blowing his nose into a napkin, and Dale whooping once from somewhere near the back. And then Owen was there, pushing through from wherever he'd been stationed, and he looked at Vivian's hand and looked at his father and said, with the precision that Nathan had loved and been exasperated by for 8 years, "I knew you were going to do it tonight. The jacket gave it away." "I thought the jacket was fine," Nathan said. "It is fine. You just never wear it unless something important is happening." Vivian laughed, the real one, the short, genuine sound, and put her arm around Owen with the ease of someone who had been doing it for months, which she had, because that was how it had happened with them. Not dramatically, not all at once. Owen had simply allowed her in by degrees, in the particular way he allowed things, slowly and then completely, without ceremony, testing not with questions but with time and proximity and the small consistent evidence of who a person actually was. Owen leaned against her for a moment and then straightened up with the 8-year-old's returning dignity. "Can we eat now?" he said. "I've been here for an hour and I've only had crackers." "Yes," Nathan said. "We can eat." They married in September. Not a large wedding. They'd talked about it in June, sitting on Nathan's back porch in the evening with the summer going dark around them, and had arrived at the same conclusion independently. Something small, something real, the people who mattered, and no one else. Vivian had a sister and a brother and 2 parents still living, all of whom came and all of whom were initially uncertain what to make of Nathan, in the particular way that families were uncertain about people who arrived in their loved ones' lives from unexpected directions, and who gradually became less uncertain over the course of a rehearsal dinner that lasted 3 hours longer than planned because Vivian's father and Kowalski discovered a shared interest in mid-century American automobile manufacturing that neither could be persuaded to table. Marcus was Nathan's best man, a foregone conclusion. His wife cried from the first minute of the ceremony and did not stop for any interval longer than 90 seconds throughout, which Marcus had predicted in advance and for which he had come prepared, producing a folded handkerchief at the 30-second mark with the resigned efficiency of a man who had been married for 12 years and knew the terrain. Owen carried the rings. He carried them with the solemnity of someone who understood the weight of the task and intended to perform it without error, which he did, presenting them at the exact right moment with a composure that Nathan recognized as a deliberate effort and loved him for. When the officiant asked if Nathan took Vivian, Nathan said yes without waiting for the full sentence, which made the officiant lose his place briefly and made the small gathering laugh. Vivian said her vows from memory. She'd written them herself, and they were not long, and they were not flowery, and they said exactly what she meant, which was that she'd spent most of her life being very sure of what she was doing and very rarely sure of who she was doing it with, and that the strange year that had begun outside a hotel in December had taught her that those two things were not, as she'd assumed, in tension with each other, that the right person didn't slow you down, they changed what you were running toward. Nathan had written his vows on a piece of paper that he folded and put in his jacket pocket, and then didn't take out, because when the moment came, the paper seemed beside the point. "I'll show up," he said. "That's the whole thing. I'll show up." Vivian looked at him with the expression he'd catalogued and studied, and come to understand as well as any expression he'd ever known on another human face, and she said quietly, "That's the whole thing." The reception was in the backyard of a house that Marcus and his wife had opened for the occasion. A long afternoon of food and conversation, and Kowalski at the center of a rotating group of people who had no prior connection to each other, and all of whom seemed to be having the same experience of finding him immediately indispensable. Dale danced badly and enthusiastically. Hector's son ate 3 pieces of cake and pretended he hadn't. Owen held court for an extended period at a corner table with Vivian's niece and nephew, explaining the intelligence of cephalopods with evangelical fervor, and Nathan watched from across the yard and felt the specific texture of a particular kind of happiness. Not loud, not transcendent, just the warm, specific weight of an afternoon that was exactly what it was supposed to be. At some point in the late afternoon, when the light had gone gold and long, Owen came and stood beside Nathan at the edge of the yard, where Nathan had drifted for a moment's quiet. They stood side by side, looking at the yard, at Vivian talking with her sister, laughing at something, her hand moving when she talked the way it always moved. And Owen didn't say anything for a while, which with Owen meant he was working toward something specific. "Dad?" he said finally. "Yeah. Do you think Mom would have liked her?" Nathan looked at his son. The question was direct and guileless and carried the weight that only direct, guileless questions can carry. He didn't rush the answer. "Yeah," he said. "I think she would have given her a hard time for the first month, because that's what your mom did with everyone she was going to love. And then she would have loved her." He paused. "She would have really liked how Vivian listens." Owen nodded, satisfied with this, the same sharp nod he used when he'd received information he'd needed. "I'm going to call her Mom," Owen said. "I've been thinking about it for a while. I just wanted to tell you first." Nathan looked at his son for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Owen said, and walked back into the yard toward the people and the food and the afternoon, leaving Nathan standing at the edge of the grass with the September light on his face. He stood there for a moment alone, which was what he sometimes needed. Not much, not long, just the brief space of a moment to hold something before it became ordinary. And he thought about what it cost a person to stay closed. Not the dramatic cost, not the catastrophic cost, but the slow, quiet cost of the years you spent being very certain about what your life was going to continue to be, and the things you didn't let in during those years, and the particular kind of loneliness that came with being good at protecting yourself. He thought about a 7-year-old's hand tightening around his in the snow. The moment before he'd knelt down and changed the direction of everything. He had spent a long time believing that the bravest thing he'd ever done was in service somewhere, in conditions that required technical skill and training and the suppression of everything that wasn't directly useful. He understood now that he'd been wrong about what bravery was. Not wrong about those moments. They'd been real. They'd mattered. But wrong about the category. The harder thing, the thing that required more sustained courage than any operation he'd been part of, was this: to stay open. To let another year be different from the one before. To kneel down in a room full of people and say plainly what you meant and let it matter what happened next. That was the thing nobody trained you for. There was no program, no course, no set of skills you could rehearse in advance. You just had to decide that the risk of it was worth the alternative and then decide again the next day. Owen was standing with Vivian now. Nathan watched his son say something to her. Couldn't hear it across the yard, just saw him say it, and watched Vivian's face change. The small, complicated expression opening into something larger and less defended, and watched her pull Owen against her side with both arms in a way that was neither careful nor performed, just the instinctive motion of someone reaching for something they'd been hoping for. Owen called her Mom for the first time in a backyard on a September afternoon, in front of no one and everyone, and Vivian held on to him in the particular way of a person who has received something they didn't know they'd needed until they had it. Nathan Cross stood at the edge of the yard and watched his family, and understood that the greatest thing he'd ever been part of had not happened on a battlefield, or in a server room, or in the cold chaos of a December street. It had happened in a series of ordinary moments: a kitchen table, a Tuesday evening garage, a park in March, a granola bar on a parts counter, a ring on a finger in a room full of people who mattered. It had happened in the decision, made again and again without fanfare, to stay. Some missions end in loss. Some end in the quiet, ordinary afternoon of a life that turned out to be larger than you'd planned. full of people you didn't plan for, going in a direction you hadn't charted. And you look at it and recognize, with some surprise and considerable gratitude, that it is exactly enough.